Hello, everyone, and welcome to lesson 2 of today's bootcamp. So we're going to be looking at how do we apply cloud business principles. So I'm going to start with the slideshow, and then we'll be able to kickstart today's session. So lesson 2 is all about how do we apply business principles. So when I say that, what do I actually mean by that, right? So it's how do we relate cloud concepts to business principles? How do we establish cloud vendor relations? How do we distinguish the financial aspects of engaging with a cloud provider, and also the operational aspect as well? And we're also going to be looking at how do you report financial expenditures. Now, because for this particular session, we're only focusing on number 1, which is how do we relate cloud concepts to business principles, and how do we establish vendor relations. So the first part is pretty much straightforward, if you ask me, because I feel like it's focused on things that we've already learned, right? So last week, we focused on how do you explain cloud principles. And I know that it might seem repetitive, but this is very, very important for us to kind of recap, because this forms as the foundation for what we're going to be discussing more when we're looking at the Cloud Essentials certification. So the first one I will say is on-demand service, right? Which is all about how does it impact business expenditures, especially capital expenditures for infrastructure. And this goes back into the 5 cloud computing characteristics, which was developed by, does anyone remember the company? It's an acronym.
Salesforce.
NIST. Yes, NIST. Salesforce is an example, but the 5 cloud principles characteristics is developed by NIST. So you're looking at NIST for that. And that's also good to kind of remember for your exam as well. So the 5 principles is on-demand self-service, which I think we all know is like you go to a Tesco, for example, and you can scan and pay and do it yourself. Then we have a concept of broad network access, which is, businesses may now be able to be more physically dispersed due to relative universal internet, which means that anyone can connect depending on wherever they are in the world. And then resource pulling, and that has to deal with the different types of clouds that are there. The fact that we have private clouds, we have public clouds, and how you can take advantage of economies of scale, especially if you're an SME business that's trying to grow into a larger enterprise, having that ability to be able to scale up. Also, rapid elasticity. Remember the example I said with balloons, where especially where you can kind of like determine how much usage of the cloud that you're using. If you need more cloud space or storage space, you can have that because your demand has changed. If you want less, you can also do that as well. So businesses may shift and focus and react to changes in the marketplace more quickly. So with the cloud, it's very elastic in how it operates. And finally, measured services. So operating expenditures may be reduced as businesses are billed only for the cloud resources they consume. So think about measured services like your pay as you go, right? So you click, sorry, some name people, pay as you go. So let's say your electricity, you only pay based on how much electricity that you've used. And that's kind of the same concept when we're looking at measured services. Now, going into the next part, going back into the different types of business cloud service models, your SaaS, your PaaS, your IaaS, going back again with software as a service, it's how, it provides a simplified licensing models and offloads support for underlying and application infrastructure, updates, and operating systems, as well as hardware issues that may result in savings. So for example, I think somebody mentioned Salesforce earlier. Salesforce will be seen as a software as a service, because remember the concept of houses, when I say it's basically like a SaaS is like going to a house and it's already furnished. You don't need to do anything. Everything is kind of already set for you. And then platform as a service provides flexible and standardized and usable development environment without the need for an in-house deployment or maintenance. And remember the example I used for that was Google App Store. So developers are able to create their apps on the platform and push it. So they don't need to worry about in-house deployment or maintenance, because the Google app as a platform actually does that work for them. And finally, infrastructure as a service, which provides an agile and scalable hardware platform from which administrators can deploy services more quickly and easy. And this is now more complex and allows big organizations to be able to customize their cloud model for themselves. So going back again, just like as a recap, software as a service, it's hosted applications. Examples are your Office 365, your Salesforce, your Gmail. Then we have your platform as a service, which deals with infrastructure software and your operating systems. And when we're looking at infrastructure software, we have examples like Oracle, MySQL, and Java. When we're looking at operation systems, you have Windows and Linux. And then the most complex one, which is infrastructure as a service, deals with your visualization, your servers and your server hardware, your networking, your data center electrical and mechanical operations. So again, it deals with hardware, if you can see, and a bit of like online work as well, but mostly hardware, as well as some visualization, which kind of deals more on cloud, which is then VMware and your Hyper-V. So when we're now going back into and actually let me just kind of, because I realize people can make this mistakes. So if you would see, when we're looking at SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS is your cloud service models, right? But what differentiates it is when we're then talking about the different types of cloud types, when we're looking at deployment especially, you're focusing on private cloud, which deals with how the businesses retain and control of their data in their own data centers, but can still leverage cloud technologies. We also deal with public cloud, which is how businesses may save costs based on public cloud service providers taking advantage of resource pooling. Going back into, remember the 5 characteristics that we were saying. And then community cloud, which is when organizations with similar businesses and security requirements can share responsibility for a cloud deployment. Examples we gave were like NHS, for example. And then the final one is hybrid, which is where organizations might utilize the benefits of both private, public, community, mix and match of those ones. Oh, I think Sasha also put in the chat, and I really like this, that cloud service is what it gives, and cloud deployment, how it gives that distinction. Essentially, I would say that cloud models are the tools and the type of cloud. And then when we're looking at the other one, when it's the deployment, it looks at your privacy and the level of control that you have concerning your cloud service, if that makes sense. Because when it's private, you have more control. When it's public, you have less control. When it's community, there is a bit of control, but it's still kind of like you sharing resource. And then when it's hybrid, you can then decide which part do you want to be private and which part do you want to be public. So that's pretty much that. And then kind of recap for everything I have said. We're looking at cloud service deployments, which can change your business practices. So for example, a shift from capital expenditures towards your operating expenditures. Also, if you have a physically dispersed workforce, it's going to change your business practice because, for example, in the past, it was quite difficult to work from home because people had, when people didn't have like cloud, they were having pieces of paper and things like that. It was very much physical based. But now with cloud, for example, this Zoom, you guys in your homes in different areas within the UK, you're able to come into this conversation and we're able to view all the same thing. It's changed the way we've done business practices. Also, an increase in hardware utilization, bringing services more quickly to the market. Example of that is Google App Store. People are able to build their apps and publish in the Google App Store much more quickly than ever before. And then a pay as you go model, because remember when we talked about the measured service characteristic of the cloud, where you pay for what you use for. So you pay as much cloud as you use. And then when we're looking at how cloud deployment affects business practices, we have different types. So we have private clouds might permit organizations to retain complete control of their data, especially if they're a private cloud, they have more control and sometimes complete control. And then when we're looking at public clouds, it permits organizations to offload some of their support expenses. And then when it's community cloud, it allows businesses to be able to distribute the financial burden of the cloud deployment amongst other groups of organizations that share similar business needs as them. And then when you're looking at hybrid, it's taking advantage of all the benefits, but being very particular with which part you want to make a private cloud and which part you want to make a public cloud and which part of the business you want to make community cloud, or utilize those different deployment models. So discussion time. So now I'm going to put people in groups, and this is only going to be for about 5 minutes. And then I want everyone to come back here and tell me kind of like their thoughts. Please nominate one person from your group that will be speaking, and sharing like the thoughts of the group. And then at the end, we'll kind of like share what everyone has said, and then I'll go into detail as to how you can answer this question. So I'm now going to try and put people in breakout rooms. So I think there is 20, how many people? 26. So I'm going to put 4 groups. And then 2, 3. So all right, everyone now should be allocated to a room. And you should all now be able to see your room. Let me know if you're having any issues.
Administration.
Francis, are you the nominated person?
No. I felt like the time was too short. I don't even know.
We didn't really get to discuss too much.
Okay, what group was that? Was that group 2?
In room 1.
Room 1. Okay. Tasha said neither did we. Okay. Did anyone get to discuss the question?
I think we rushed it through, but I don't know what group I was. I can't even remember I don't.
Chireri, I think we're in group 3. Is that correct? I'm not
Room
sure.
2, it was room 2.
Okay, all right, room 2. Someone is outside the group. Buzaya was thrown out.
Oh, we're all in the main room now. But I think beside next time, I will be able to put you back in your group for the next session. So does anyone want to share their thoughts for this question at all before I go into the answers?
I think we kind of rushed through it, but what we have was that we used all the, what do they call it, characteristics. So we started with the, let's see, the broad network access, the fact that it's geographically, it can be geographically, oh gosh.
Don't worry.
Geographically accessed, sorry. It can be geographically accessed. So that means that if you have multiple mini, what they call it, branches in several places, they can access whatever resource you throw on there. And then the resource pooling, the fact that you assess the resource on demand to those that really like what is needed for and how much of what is needed, like how much of the demand that they need. And then the next,
so, yeah. So I'll help there, Chiri.
Oh yeah,
so
do
like,
you continue? I think you were the one that explained more.
So more like
I feel like I'm
allocating,
biting my tongue.
yeah, allocating resources on demand in terms of so that there's effective utilization. You're not utilizing, and you're putting the resources well to where the business best needs it. Then we moved on to rapid elasticity, and that's what that means. Like the balloon, like you explained, like you can adapt in terms of say for instance, the virtualization machine, the space you need. You're not using things just as much as you need. That's what you can adjust out all through the year. For example, when traffic picks up, you can, is it scale out now or scale up? Is that right?
They can do either. They can do scale up or they can do scale out.
Yeah. So that explains our rapid elasticity, and of course that helps us to adjust our resources and just put them where it's needed best, and also helps with the economics. Is that economy of scale, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Great. Yes.
Then
so the resources are provisioned and released to adjust for changes in demand and consumption. Sorry, I just wanted to add to your rapid elasticity to boost it up for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Then I think we moved on to the on-demand self-service, meaning that, because there's no need for human assistance here, you've got a dashboard, everything is more like your DIY kind of thing. You kind of know how to plow your way through. And unlike when you have an on-premise, you've got to get expertise and all of that, pay for all of that. You don't really need to do that. Once you're trained and like we are doing the CompTIA A now, that's why they give you and I that role to do. So we'll be getting lots of jobs as a result of this. So on-demand self-service. And then we've got measured service, which is carefully, this is like metered by cloud providers. That means like your pay-as-you-go electricity in the house, you only get billed for, what you use and the actual type of resources you use. So that helps you also with the economics of skills, helps us to really, manage cost, be cost efficient. That's how we impact our business. So we rushed through, but I think it kind of made sense to all of us.
Where do I put my thumbs up for you?
That's to the whole teamwork.
Yes.
Stephanie, unmuted, sorry.
Oh, thank you. I was saying thank you to everyone. I was saying thank you to Francis, Dayor, and Osareme for that answer. And then I was saying that Sade is up next.
Great, thank you. Like with the other team, we didn't really have much time, but I can just add to each of the points that was made. So like with on-demand self-service, we said as a company, we can perform services at any time and we can install apps dynamically anytime without having to go through the whole life cycle. And with resource pooling, we said consumers can provision resources as needed automatically with access to different types of cloud deployment models. And then with measured service, we said it gives our business better idea of cloud costs and we can budget for that better. And rapid elasticity, we said we can adapt operations better to either busy or quiet business periods. Like, for example, if during Christmas time we're busy and we need more resources, then we can adapt to more, I guess, access to like provisions like we would need during that time. That was pretty much what we had.
Thank you so much, Sade. And I just want to make sure I've given everyone a chance. Does anyone else want to say anything before I move on to the answers? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So what are we looking at? First of all, great job, everyone, and especially everyone who spoke. You guys are not far from the answer, actually. So in regards to kind of the main answer, we were looking at things of like elasticity, which was talked about, and scalability, and to the business developing more agile practices or shifting from more capital to operational expenses using that pay-as-you-go pricing model. Now, going back, it feels like I'm going to be sounding like a broken record, but going back to the 5 fundamental characteristics which was mentioned, your on demand, which is users, provision, managing resources as when needed without requiring human interaction with the service provider. Also, we talked about the broader network access, which was mentioned. So capabilities are available and accessed, promoting the use of heterogeneous client platforms. The idea of resource pulling, which has to do with, let me go back, which has to do with the providers competing resources, which are pulled from different consumers and using multi-tenant models, and rapid elasticity, which deals with capability, which can be quickly scaled out, which I think was mentioned by Dio, and in some cases scaled in to accommodate the different change in demands. And also cloud systems automatically control and optimize resources by leveraging a metered capability, so pay-as-you-go, to increase efficiency. And I think looking at the chat, Chinere said, overall, the 5 characteristics help organizations streamline their operations, improve scalability, reduce costs, and enhance collaboration, and ultimately drive innovation and business growth, which is true. Now, if we're going back to look at how does each of these characteristics actually play a part, when we talked about operational efficiency and cloud, when we're looking at operational efficiency and cloud reduction, we're looking at on-demand services, for example. They allow organizations to provide resources as and when required, leading to a better resource management and cost control. Another good example is, for example, when people self-publish their books with Amazon, for example, Amazon is not going to print that book unless somebody buys the book. And because of that, it's already creating that efficiency and better use of resources. Now, measured service ensures that you only build for what you're used, again, optimizing your expenses and eliminating costs associated with underutilized resources. Now, when we're looking at flexibility and scalability, rapid elasticity provides businesses with the agility to scale their services up or down based on demand. So this is beneficial, for example, if you have peak seasons, for example, if you're a retail company and you have Black Friday, for example, you're expecting to have a spike in your traffic. So you've been able to kind of deal with those changes in demand. And then when we look at resource pulling, it falls under flexibility and scalability because it allows organizations to use shared resources, again, better optimizing their utilization and mitigating the need for unnecessary infrastructure investment. And then the final one on this page is enhanced accessibility. And that deals with broad network access, which ensures that your stakeholders, your employees, can access your organization data and application from anywhere in the world, providing flexibility and supporting what we now have. The example I used much earlier, remote work models. You can access it from anywhere, especially with a multinational company. It means that people from all over the world can work together, again, improving that innovation and that business growth within the company. Now, when we're looking at innovation and rapid development, 2 things you want to think about is your on-demand self-service and your rapid elasticity. Why? Because your development teams can quickly provide resources for testing and deployment. So it reduces that time to market for new products and services because you're able to quickly change things on the go, and also being able to adapt quickly to your user demand or your user, essentially your user demand. Now, when we're looking at risk management and business continuity, resource pulling is what you're going to be looking at. And that's because in cloud environments, it's often built with your redundancy. So this means that in an event of a hardware failure or data breach, you have another resource that can take over minimizing your downtime. If you guys remember what we talked about last week with our RPO and RTO, it comes into play here. And finally, under risk management and business continuity is cloud providers invest significantly in security measures. Why? Because by leveraging their expertise and infrastructure, organizations can benefit from a robust security practice without the need for a large internal investment or a large need to kind of create their own infrastructure from the beginning. They can utilize organizations such as AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure, who already have that expertise and already have that strong security model that they can benefit from. And then also sustainable IT, right? Migrating to the cloud can significantly control carbon footprint of an organization if you want to think about the environmental aspect of cloud. Instead of maintaining and having like your cooling extensive in-house data centers, companies can now rely on efficient and pooled resources from cloud providers. Now, finally is better decision-making. And why it goes back into the measured service, right? And that's because measured services provide detailed insights into resource utilization. So in a sense that allows businesses to make data-driven decisions, which help them to optimize their operations further. Now, in final points, to maximize these benefits, organizations will need to conduct a thorough assessment of their needs, understand the offerings from various cloud providers, and create a comprehensive cloud strategy. So this can involve deciding which workload to migrate. So looking at the cloud models, such as the IaaS, the PaaS, or the SaaS, looking at which ones they need to adopt, and also understanding how they'll be able to create their data security and compliance within the cloud environment. So next question, and this one is going to be fast. We don't need like a group conversation to answer this question, is how might an infrastructure as a service solution help developers who need to test their server for quality control, especially when looking at a new web application? What do we think? Feel free to put it in the chat on your thoughts on what the answer to that might be. Any thoughts? Okay, Afia says efficiency. Any more?
I think it would help the developer not have to source for the infrastructure to get a server or find a server and have to wait for a server admin. They can just spin it up on a cloud instance and I guess deactivate it when they're done.
Okay. Thank you, Blessing. Francis, I see you have your hands up.
I'm going to see it from the view of, because a VMware is one of an infrastructure. So I'm going to say in a way that's like testing out your product or something. So it's going to give you a platform to test it for any vulnerabilities or anything before releasing it into the public. Maybe test run it and see if it's actually meeting all the requirements, all the user requirements or security requirements that you need to on this set of this kind of infrastructural platforms before you put it out. So that is what I think.
Okay, thank you, Francis. I'm seeing in the chat that Ufama said accuracy and time. Sasha said risk management can create a test environment. Linda said cost control. And you guys are not far from it. So in going to what the answer is, oh, okay, I'm seeing Chinwe's answer quickly. Due to controlled nature of the test environment, it helps to mitigate the impact on production. Yes, you guys are not far. So administrators can provide a virtual machine template that includes the hardware specifications, And then the developers will then need to have their automation script to install any necessary applications. So within this example, developers can then build these virtual machines on their own whenever needed in a self-service on-demand manner. Now, a good thing to think about this question is, remember what I said about going back to the characteristics, is when you guys maybe are looking back on the video and we're looking at the answers to these questions in these scenarios, think about the characteristics, the 5 characteristics. Where am I seeing the 5 characteristics in this scenario, in this scenario given, essentially? Now, Dio has raised her hand. Sorry, before I move on. Yes, Dio?
Yeah, I was just thinking, would perhaps actually not actually be better in this case? Because then the person can, the developer can test on the different, like go to Google and see if it works, if it's a new web application. Wouldn't it be more ideal in that case?
I mean, it could be more ideal, but you have to also think about the data. Would they want to put it in a public platform like that? I don't think they would.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha.
Anyway, so I'm just seeing people. Basai and Francis, do you guys want to say anything? Because I see you have your mic on. Okay, I'll say that's a no. So the final one is to list and discuss 3 other businesses that your organization could partner with. To develop a community cloud deployment. If your organization cannot partner with any others, then give examples of types of businesses that could. Does anyone want to kind of give it a go about any businesses that you feel like your organizations can partner with? Shade, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I guess like in terms when you look at community cloud, a business that you might want to partner with is a business that is in the same industry as you. So if you were in the clothing industry, then you'd also, like if I was a H&M, then I could partner up with Zara, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Does anyone, I see Francis has her hands up, and let me go to participants because I see another person has their hands up. Ufoma, okay. Francis, you want to go first, and then Ufoma will go next.
Okay, I'm going to see this as because I work in a school, I'm going to see this as schools partnering together and forming a trust to be able to share resources online and to be able to share like training materials, teaching materials and everything to reduce teacher workload instead of like reduplicating brand new assessment sheets and PowerPoints. So it's just like us coming together in a trust and then sharing all those things and just partnering with each other and stuff like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for that. And you're definitely on the right vein. Ufoma and then Dio.
I would say restaurants, in terms of like their distribution. They could share like the different places to get distribution, local distribution, national, global, something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Ufoma. Dio on the night.
Yeah, I was thinking more like your local councils. So services available within the local councils, networking with either, i.e. your recycling plants, or where you put what do you call them? Where you put your rubbish. Yes, so recycling plants and all of that. Mm-hmm. And also probably healthcare agencies, probably not. No, I'm not sure about hospitals because it depends on the data as well. But I was thinking like agencies, local, like where you have like your agencies and you can ping if someone is available to work somewhere else and all of that, like work agencies.
Okay, definitely on the right track. Blessing. Thank you, Daya, for that answer. Blessing, you're next, and then I'll read all the chat comments as well.
Okay. I was thinking more like commercial banks that maybe process payments using one like the same payment scheme. So like maybe one in Europe and one in Africa, like the BACS payment scheme. So they could leverage the payments, if the payment scheme was cloud-based, they could leverage that to process the transactions and exchange data around, you know, the transactions, the numbers, whatever data they might want to get from that.
Okay, thank you so much, Blessing, for that answer. I think reading from the chat, and then I'm gonna talk about the answer. So Hawa said financial institutions with different banks. Afia said GP practices, clinics, and hospitals to share patient information. I agree. I think it will depend on if they have more similarities in regards to like geographical location. I'm seeing Chinere said NHS partnering with hospitals for shared services. Ufuma said charities with specific fields. Augustina said transport and logistics. Ufuma said police in different areas. And Chinere said interswitch with banks on payment services. So I would say the answer is everybody's pretty much right. And I've seen Francis one on schools partnering with child social services. I think the key element when we're looking at community cloud is that they need to operate, one, in the same industry, and two, they need to be able to I think another concept is that they need to be able to share similar data storage needs, and they need to have similar security needs, and they need to have similar and shared interests. I think where it might be difficult is, especially with banks, I know that there is a community group called FS ISAC, and they are for financial companies and banks, and they have their own kind of like shared practices, but they may not necessarily like their community cloud in that aspect might just be on best practices rather than like deep knowledge, because each company still needs to protect their own assets and their own intellectual property. So when we're looking at community cloud deployment, I think you can understand it in 3 points. First, is it in the same industry? Are the business in the same industry? 2, do they have similar data storage needs? And 3, do they have similar security needs? Those are the 3 main points. But also, do they have shared interests, essentially? So any organization that has shared interests and they have like similarities in their data storages and their security needs, and then the industry are able to have a joint kind of community cloud deployment where they all come together and share the cost for that maintenance of that community cloud deployment. So we're now going to move into the second aspect, which I might rush a little bit. But with part B, what essentially that we're looking at is 2.2, which focuses on how do we summarize the financial aspect. Wait, sorry, did someone raise their hand? Let me check. Chinere, did you raise your hand?
Yes, I wanted to clarify. Based on the shared community cloud service you mentioned, could it be likened to say a group of company, for instance, holdings, like a holding company that has subsidiaries that now have a particular service that the holding has, and they have a cost attached to it and is being shared among the subsidiaries? Can that be likened to cloud to the community cloud service?
It can.
Say, for instance, an holding is actually paid for Office 365, for instance, and you have the subsidiaries having to get a license, and the cost is shared among them all. Does that apply to what you intend to say? I just want to liken it to the normal activities that we run.
Yes, I think in the concept of the subsidiaries, yes, it does work for that, because they will have similar storage needs.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. I would say it can be likened to that. Let's see, any final thoughts on this? Okay, if anyone has any other questions, please let me know in the chat. But I'll also be keeping my eye on the participants. So for topic B, we're going to be looking at how do we establish cloud vendor operations? You know, how do you summarize your financial aspects of engaging with a cloud provider? And how do you identify the important business aspect of vendor relations within cloud adoption? So I think if we're looking at the next slide, we're going to be focusing on different things. The first one we're going to be looking at is professional services, which is broken down. And this leads to part one, when we're looking at how do we make those financial decisions, for example. So the first one we need to think about is our cloud, our time to market. And then the second one we need to then also think about is what is our skill availability. So thinking about the skills that you have within your company and skills that you might need to outsource. For example, we talked about how well-established cloud providers have a robust security structure that companies might not be able to kind of replicate based on the financial cost tied to that. And then we also have support. And then we also have managed services, and how do all of these things play? Now, I will say that when we are thinking about, going back to the previous slide, when we are thinking about the financial aspects of engaging a cloud provider, I would say that we need to think about 6 things. The first one is, what is your initial investment cost? So, you know, when we're looking at traditional in-house data centers, they normally require an initial investment in hardware, software, and infrastructure setup. Now, that has changed because now with cloud models, you don't, you know, the initial investment's a lot lower because you're not really focusing on the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is owned by vendors such as Google Cloud, AWS, and Azure. And because of that, you know, you don't have to also deal with the maintenance cost, because the maintenance cost is taken by the cloud provider. Also, operational costs with cloud businesses are typically billed again on the pay-as-you-go subscription. So costs are incurred on an actual usage basis. So because of that, it reduces underused resources. Also cost flexibility as well. You need to think about that. Organizations can easily scale up or scale down based on the scalability of the cloud. But also hidden costs. And I think it's something that you guys might need to consider, especially when you're looking at vendor relations, is what are the potential fees? Things like your data transfer or additional services that you might need to take into consideration when you're looking at the financial aspects of engaging with a provider. You know, even asking them, what is the total cost of ownership? Because over time, the TCO for cloud services can be more favorable when you're thinking about your maintenance, your usages, your energy consumption, your personnel training, and other things. How do you train people to actually use the cloud and things like that, especially if it's focused on more niche areas? And then finally, what is your return of investment? When you're looking at cloud model, they can yield a faster return of investment because of that reduced initial investment costs. And also it's quicker for deployment of services. Now, going back into professional services, we're going to first start with time to market. So time to market is a quantity of time between when a service or a product is imagined and when it's available to the customers. So I would say when thinking about the definition of time to market is the duration between the conception of a product or service and its availability to customers. And when we're then looking at it, you know, focusing on the benefits of this is that cloud services can reduce time to market for new services. Why? Because of faster deployment and scalability, because it leverages on an on-demand self-service feature. Also, greater business, you know, business agility. Why? Because you have that quicker adjustment to market changes. So if there is a change in demand, you can quickly respond to it. Why? Because of that rapid elasticity that we talked about. And then being able to kind of reduce the developmental and testing delays, because the infrastructure provisioning is immediate. Why? Because it leverages on that self-service cloud characteristic. Now, when we are going into skill availability, is where cloud service providers may employ knowledgeable staff to help your organization migrate to the cloud. Now, cloud providers often have a diverse team of experts to aid businesses in their cloud journey. So let's say if you decide to use Google Cloud, for example, you'll be assigned with a account manager who will be helping you with that migration, with your cloud journey. However, when you are thinking about having that in-house knowledge, you need to think about different skills. And the 4 main skills you're looking at is your database administration. So who's going to be overseeing and managing your database operation? You need someone with that skill set. You're also web application deployment. So launching and maintaining web apps. How do you do that? Who's going to be responsible for that? But then also we're looking at e-commerce solutions, which deals with ensuring that your online transaction systems are functional and secure. And finally, your environment, your development environment, which is all about setting up platforms for coding and testing. Now, you need people who have these skills and people who understand the different elements of those 4 skills mentioned. Now, another aspect is support. And that is understanding what level of support would your organization need. So when we're thinking about support, we normally come with a concept of SLAs, which is your service level agreements. This allows you to itemize and also formalize your vendor support. So an easy way to think of your service level agreements is contracts detailing the expected level of service, including your uptime, your response time, and penalties for not meeting these standards. So as a cloud architect within your company, you should be thinking, okay, what is our expected level of service, uptime, response times, and what are the penalties if these standards are not met? And this is dealing with your third-party relationships. Also, when we're looking at support, is understanding that support may come from different sources. So you might have your in-house IT teams. You might also have your managed service providers, your cloud provider support staff. Now, when you're looking at skills possessed by cloud support technicians who might be needed, you're looking for someone, let me go back. You're looking for someone who has a comprehensive understanding of your provider's offerings and someone who has expertise in areas such as storage, database, networking. So you need someone with expertise when working with cloud. You need someone who has an expertise in cloud storage, in cloud databases, and in cloud networks as well. Because it kind of goes back into our point here when we're talking about the type of skills that you would need to help your organization migrate to the cloud, or to help your organization maintain the cloud, maintain the migration, or maintain the cloud after the migration, essentially. Now, when we are looking at kind of skills needed, and especially when we're looking at what is the role of a security architect, what's the role of a security support technician, you are expected to have these sort of skills. You're expected to understand how to cloud design. You're supposed to understand cloud migration, what it means, what is the processes, how does that, what are the different levels of those processes. Also understanding cloud security, understanding what virtual machine design looks like and how that could be supported. Also, going back into what I said about network, understanding how to configure a network within the cloud, and an understanding of a CSP's offering. Finally, it's good to have a specialization. in areas. So it could be cloud storage, it could be database, e-commerce. And these are the things that you can use, especially when you're going for interviews, is saying, yes, you know, I've done this certification and, you know, I've been able to work on this particular project. These were my specializations once when I did this certification, for example. You want to be able to bring that out, especially for interviews, to show your expertise and to solidify your expertise even further to your potential employer. So when we're now looking at managed service, so managed service, cloud service providers can offer services that allow organizations to offload responsibilities. So it helps businesses in their day-to-day operation, in their business as usual. And you have different elements. So the first one you have is day-to-day management. So it's ensuring that systems run smoothly. The second one is design. So design has to deal with how do you craft a optimal cloud architecture. The third one is migration. So migration deals with how do you move your data and your service from on-premise to another cloud. So moving data and services from either an on-premise or another cloud to a cloud. And then the final one is deployment, which deals with how do you launch applications and services in the cloud. So an example that we have here is you have the organization, which has a direct managed service providers on organization needs. You now have your managed service provider in the middle, and then that managed service provider helps with cloud design, migration, deployment. So essentially, what cloud service providers do is that they offset some of these kind of responsibilities that will be expected. And because they offset some of these activities, it allows companies to be able to be more efficient, to be able to focus more on innovation, but also it helps reduce the costs. Because if a organization was to take on all this cost and build the infrastructure themselves, it's going to cost them a lot more. So they're actually benefiting a lot more by using managed services rather than doing it by themselves. So we're now going to go into the second element, which is formal requests. So in the context of cloud computing, formal requests are tools organizations use to gather information. So what you're looking at with your formal request is how do you gather information? How do you solicit proposals? How do you obtain your pricing details from cloud vendors? And these requests are grouped into 3 categories. The first category is your request for information. Your second category is your request for proposal. And your third category is your request for quotes. So your request for information has to deal with how organizations gather information. Your request for proposal helps you to solicit proposals. And your request for quotes allows you to be able to obtain your pricing details from your cloud vendors. So going into, we're starting with requests for information. So this is like a standard method of gathering written documentation. And I would say like the purpose of your request for information is how do you gather basic information from potential vendors about their services and capabilities? Why? You need to be able to request this information to be able to understand, okay, based on the information I've gotten from these different vendors, which kind of structure best suits my company, which structure best suits my organization and its needs as where we're at. So, you know, you want to be looking at information regarding services, your capabilities, potential costs, support, training services. So let's say you're a small SME, you would want to be with a vendor that offers a large level of support, because you're going to need that support because you don't have that in-house skill or that in-house capability. Now, I would say that when you're looking at the standard format for request for information, it deals with 4 different things. I'll see if there's a next page, but it basically allows you to make comparisons between the different vendors and for you to be able to make your analysis easier. So if you're going to a board to say, hey, I think we should go with AWS, for example, this is because I've been able to these are the comparisons that I've seen with these 3 vendors. This is the information I've been able to gather. This is what I've seen that works best for us based on our needs and our strategy. Because again, thinking about it, you want to be able to pull as to why you're choosing that specific cloud design, why you're choosing that specific vendor, and how does that relate to the organization's strategy, overall strategy. You want to be able to keep pulling that, because that's how you'll be able to show that the cloud that you're choosing meets the business needs. So when we're looking at the structure of a request for information, it has key components. The first one is statement of need / product introduction. This deals with the overview of the project and the challenge, right? Why do you need to use a cloud? Why does your company need to move into a cloud structure? What is the challenge? What is the project about? Then the second one is background. So background deals with the organization history. What's the history of the organization? What is the current infrastructure of the organization? What is the context for this request? Then you're dealing with qualifications for selection. So what prerequisites that vendors need to meet before they're even considered as a potential vendor that you plan to use, for example. So you need to have your prerequisites for these. This is the background of the organization. This is a challenge of the need. And based on the challenge that we've identified, these are the solutions that we're looking for. And these are the requirements that the vendors have to meet. Because by having that, it allows you to, first of all, have a checklist of, do I need to even speak to this organization? Do I need to speak to this vendor? Do I need to move further with this vendor? Because you're already thinking about the prerequisites for that conversation. And then you're thinking about your objectives, and your objective deals with the goals the organization aims to achieve. And then you have required information, which deals with the, oops, go back. Okay. So the required information deals with specific data or insights sought from the vendor. And then the final one, I believe, is the second to the last, is the selection criteria, which is the metrics or standards by which the vendors will be evaluated. And finally, you have your time frame. So what are the deadlines associated with your request, and what is your project timeline? Now, I would say that when a request of information might be useful is when an organization has a clear goal but needs detailed information on how different vendors can assist it in achieving that goal. So the scenario in which you would be using a request for information is when your organization, keyword, has a clear goal but needs detailed information on how vendors can assist it in achieving those goals that it has already set. So when we're looking at request for proposal, so request for proposal, RFP, deals with how do you solicit detailed proposals from vendors on how they will address a specific challenge or topic. So when we're looking at that, it has key components that we have to consider. But looking at it from a Black point of view on the purposes is, it's normally sent to potential vendors. It outlines the project, the budget, and the timeline. Again, this is information that you've already gotten from your RFI. And then it also defines the organization needs to the vendor. Now, this is used when organizations have a challenge to meet, but they don't have a specific plan on how to address it. So understanding the different scenarios in where you might require a request for information or where you might require a request for a proposal. So going back to request for proposal, there are key elements that you need to think about. I know I've mentioned it, but just to have it as a bullet point is the key components for a request for proposal is your project overview. So this is the high level details of the project. The second point is your budget. What is the financial allocation or range for the project? The third one is your expected milestones and your completion dates. And the final one is detailed needs and specification. So be specific about, at that moment, what does the organization require from the vendor? And going back to what I said about the scenario when it's used is when an organization recognizes a challenge or need, but they haven't settled on the specific solution or strategy that they need to take. And an RFP allows a vendor to propose varied methods and technologies to address it. Now, for the final one is request for quote. So this requires, invites potential vendors to bid on a project, and is focused on cost estimates. So responses should be have an itemized list of services and pricing estimates, and it's non-binding. So you're not bound to have to pay anything up front. So going back to the request for quote, this is primarily centered on cost, and the request is seeking a detailed pricing information from vendors for a well-defined project or purchase. And the key components for a request for quote or RFQ is project details. So having a clear and precise details of what is required, allowing vendors to be able to provide accurate quotes because they know step by step what is required from their clients, and having your expected deliverables. So what do you expect to receive? And then your time frame is associated with the project and purchase. When do you expect the project or purchase to happen? Now, this is when an organization has a well-defined plan. The plan has to be well-defined. Remember, it has to be well-defined for request of information and also for request of quote. But especially for request of quote, because the well-defined plan is going to allow the vendor to know the exact cost for the plan that you have. And this is especially important because it allows the vendors to kind of determine the cost, and it is also helpful for you to use that to compare the different costs across various vendors to see which one is suitable to your organization based on your budget and strategy as well. Going back, requests for proposal, the only one where the organization doesn't have a clear description of their solution or strategy. But for requests for information and requests for quote, you have to have a well-defined plan or solution. Now we're going into service documents, which deals with two. We have your statement of work, and we also have your service level agreement. So when we're going to status of work, or actually, let me go back to service documents. What does it mean? Service document is when you're engaging with a cloud provider, you need specific documents that dictate the terms of service. So these are important to ensure that both parties understand what is expected from each other, the conditions of that service, and based on that, you can use two documents, which are your statement of work and your service level agreement, which we already kind of touched upon a little bit in the previous slides. So going with the statement of work, it's a detailed document that defines all facets of a project, from the objectives to the deliverables, and it has key components. The key components is your introduction. So the introduction deals with, which you can kind of see from this infographic, your introduction is your brief overview of your project. Your project purpose and scope has to deal with what is the primary goal and extent of the project. Then you have your location, which deals with where will the work be executed. Then you have your tasks. So your task deals with what are the specific activities that need to be performed. Then you have your deliverables and milestones and schedules, and these deals with your tangible outcome, your significant phases, and your timeline. And again, you want to be able to set expectations for your project scope, your schedule, your payment information, and criteria for success. Now, going back into the details of this, I talked about introduction, its project purpose and scope, where the work takes place, which is location, the task, your deliverable and milestones and schedules. Now, when we're looking at the definitions of project success, it's the criteria that's determining the project success, essentially, is what the name implies. When we're looking at requirement, it deals with what are the necessary tools, resources, or conditions that are needed. And then when we're looking at payment details, it's looking at information regarding compensation, such amounts, methods, and schedule of payment. And then finally, you have your closing statement, which is like your formal conclusion, possibly with next steps and possibly with acknowledgements. Then when we're moving into the next one, which is your SLAs, that deals with your service level agreement. And this deals with how do we SLA, it deals with, a service level agreement is a contractual document that specifies the expected levels of a service from a vendor. So it defined what level of service are you looking to get from your vendor. Now, it sets expectations for all involved parties, and it has specific metrics for satisfactory service. So these metrics are often defined as a percentage of availability. So remember, last week we talked about when we're looking at business continuity and disaster recovery, we talked about the 5 nines, which is uptime will not be less than 99.999% of the month. You need that as part of a metrics. That is a quantified metrics that you're expecting your vendor to be able to provide. Now, going back there, when we are looking at the key components, there are 4 for a service level agreement. The first one is metrics for service. So these are your quantifiable standards for service. So uptime, which is what the example given, response times, and throughput. And then you have the second one, which deals with your penalties and your breaches. So what is the consequences if an agreed level is not met? What is the consequences for the cloud provider? Then we have dispute resolution, which is the procedure for how we'll be able to handle these disagreements or handle these penalties or for these breaches and things like that. And then finally, the 4th component is duration and review, which deals with how long does a service level agreement last and when does it need to be reassessed by both parties. So those are the 4 components that are needed. Pardon me. And then we're now going to move to open source versus proprietary cloud services. Now, open source versus proprietary cloud services is understanding the difference between these 2 things, right? And this is crucial because it impacts your organization's operation. It also impacts your cost structure and it impacts your flexibility. So understanding what these 2 things are, these 2 cloud services are, their definition, their characteristics allows you to understand, okay, which one would impact my organization's operation, our style of cost structure, and our flexibility. So starting with open source. So open source is a licensing mechanism, right? In this scenario, the source is freely available. It may be modified or re-released by anyone. Open source is associated with free, so it's free of cost, and it's freedom to change the code and release the changes as when possible. So when we're looking at a definition of your open cloud service, is a cloud service based on open source software. So this is where the source code is freely accessible and modifiable. Now the characteristics, which you might need for bullet points, sorry, did someone put in something in the chat, like Linux? Open source, yes. Yes, Afia, sorry, I didn't see your comment earlier. But when we're looking at the characteristics of an open source cloud service, number 1, it is the cost, it's free. Remember when I talked about it having been free in the sense that it's freely available, but also it usually refers to the cost of acquisition. So when we look at how do you acquire this code, it's normally free. But where you might actually think about the cost is when you're thinking about the implementation, the training, and the maintenance. Those are where the cost is likely to incur. When we're looking at flexibility within open source cloud services, organizations can modify and tailor their software to their unique requirements. And then also community support within open source cloud services is that the solution and updates often emerge from a collaborative community because everyone is working together to maintain the cloud service and to improve it as well. Now, when we're looking at proprietary software, it's usually related to a specific vendor. So the vendor is able to provide any support, any updates, any training, And the vendor controls the software lifecycle as well. And this may lead to a vendor lock-in. So when we're looking at proprietary cloud services, is cloud services based on software owned by a specific company or an individual? The source code in this example is typically not available to the public. And the characteristics for your proprietary cloud service are 3 things. Number 1, vendor-centric. All support, updates, training come directly from the vendor. Second thing you need to think about is consistent experiences. Now, since the software is controlled by one entity, users can often experience a standardized and predictable service. There isn't like as much changes done to it like your open source, for example. But there is a potential lock-in. Now, that is transitioning away from proprietary services can be challenging due to the specific tools, configuration, data that format or is unique to that vendor. So an example is not really tied to it, but if you use Apple products, for example, your Apple Watch syncs with your Apple phone, syncs with your laptop. Now you're locked in. Let's say you now decide to buy an Android. You may not be able to use certain services because they don't align with the Android phone that you might have. For example, you may not be able to access your Android phone as easily from your Mac as you would be an iPhone to your Mac. So things like that shows that potential vendor lock-in on how everything is specific tools and configuration are tied to each other. So you can't leave, because if you leave, you'll be unable to use those tools that would be readily available to you. Now, a recap of everything that we have learned from this section is that a use of requests for information is when businesses know what it needs, but requires information from potential vendors on how to accomplish those needs. A use for request for proposal is when a business recognizes that it has service needs, but is unsure how to meet them. The use for request for quotes is when a business needs to know how vendors will accomplish a goal and what the associated cost would be. Now, when we're looking at the statement of work, it's a project management document that defines the project's scope, schedule, payment information, and success criteria. Now, when we're looking at a service level agreement, it defines the services being supported. It also looks at what the service level targets are and the responsibility of each party within that service level agreement. So, I think the answer came up, but we are going to look at question times. So, for the first question, looking at what we've learned, one of the managers on your company's cloud migration team has been approached by a company that specializes in administering cloud services on behalf of companies like yours. What kind of company is this? Does anyone want to be able to give an answer in the chat? Okay. The someone says IaaS. Any more thoughts? Okay. I'm going to see what the answer is. Cloud managed service provider. So remember what we've been talking about, we've been looking at relationships with cloud managed service providers. And then looking at the type of providers, I think that's where we're going more into detail. But just looking at it from the basic high level, the answer is going to be a cloud managed service provider. Now, the second question, you are a business analyst. How do you explain the two uses of the word free when it comes to open source, especially if you're talking to someone from a non-technical background? Does anyone have thoughts on what the answer might be? Francis, I see you have your hands up. Go ahead.
Oh, it's free in the sense that it's not paid for. The license may not be paid for. It's basically like, the way I would see it is like the modifiable codes you could get on GitHub and then make them into your own, like all this email reader stuff. So you're not locked into any payments type or any payment policy. And basically like, so long as you have the code, you can keep reinventing it. But the paid one, if the vendor decides not to patch it up or to phase it out, it just has to go. So it's free in the sense like you just play with it, just do whatever you want with it, and it's still there for you.
Okay, thank you, Francis. I think Dio had her hands up, and then after Dio will be Blessing.
Yeah, I think the last person already answered it, but it's like I think of it like a library that you go in and you access free. I mean, you can take up any of the free code. So like your basic, like you want to develop something, and for example, when you open like your basic, how do I explain this? Web page, and you see things like login and all those things, those kind of codes that you can easily pick and use. You can refresh, you can do something with it, you can remodify it and all of that, and it's absolutely free. You're not locked into any kind of payments, contracts, or anything. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dio, for that answer. Blessing, you next.
If I wanted to explain to a non-technical person, I would just use the definition of free. So when you say free, what do you think? You think no money. So one way to explain it would be there's no cost implication. You're not paying any money. It's free of cost. And then the other way, when you say free as well, it just means like I'm free. I'm a free person. So the other way to explain it would be you're free to change. You're free to update, you're free to release changes as you please. So
thank you so much, Blessing. And I'm looking at the chat. Ufama said modifiable and easily accessible. Susie said freedom to change. Lasayo said freedom to use software for free. And Chinue said programs whose source code are available to use and modify. And then Shade said free to use and free to modify. Well, thank you all for your contributions. So I think everyone was pretty much right in their approach. Open source software is free of charge, but keyword is modified. So freely modified and modified versions can be freely distributed. So I will look at the answer in two things: freely modified and freely distributed. And it's kind of a great way to understand it. Blessing, your hand's still up. Was that from previous time, or do you want to contribute? Okay, I will take that as a no. So that's why we've kind of stopped on today's session. I'm going to stop the recording here, and then we are going to discuss the